Alrighty, folks, it is time for Grand Prix Mirage Expo, and I've had a lot of struggles preparing for this GP. It is the inaugural tournament of the Errors in the Weft and Kitsuo Dusk of Time season from May through to August. I've spent a lot of time trying to tinker with slower, grindier decks, stuff using Revolt at the Palace and a bunch of enchantments, stuff looking kind of like a lot of the old black green ramp shells, and building up to resource inversion with Altar of Chrome. Tinkered around with some of the token shells that have been seeing some success, tinkering around with some of the sacrifice strategies that are available. And the deck that has given me the most success is not one that is particularly interested in kicking around for a bunch of long games. And this is Red Green Looter Stompy. I'm not the only one who has been on a deck like this. I've seen a lot of people messing around with Red Green Stompy in various interpretations, but a lot of people skewing more towards the green side of the equation. Understandable reason to do so. Green Stompy was one of the big hallmark decks of the last format. But I think right now, more than ever, we're really getting to see a lot of great red components to this deck start to properly shine. So let's dig into Looter Stompy. This is a 30 creature deck. We have 30 creatures, 8 sorceries, and 22 lands in the main. And then we'll get into sideboard later, of course. So our main deck is all creatures between 1 and 3 mana value, and that is because of Foreign Encounter. This is 1 red and a green for a sorcery that looks at the top 6 cards of your library, putting a creature card with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter, while the rest go to the bottom in a random order. It also has cycling for a red or a green. We aren't going to be using it for that cycling cost most of the time. In a pinch, if we're really struggling to hit land drops, we can use that cycling cost. But honestly, we have effects in the deck that let us just cycle this effectively for free. So if we're ever really priced to need to discard Foreign Encounter, we probably still won't have to pay that cycling cost to do so. Foreign Encounter is a large component to the deck's construction. We don't have any creatures above 3 mana value. I did briefly tinker around with Amagaseto, the 4 mana 2/3 that kind of does a bit of a grindy thing, puts a counter on one of your other creatures at combat, and you can play creatures from your graveyard by removing counters equal to their mana value from creatures you control. Amagaseto just proved to be really sluggish, and this deck really does just want to kill quickly, and so Amagaseto just was not conducive to that kind of strategy. What we do have, though, is a very, very lean curve. 8 1-drops. I believe this is 14 2-drops and 8 3-drops. So our 1-drops, we're starting off with Ignited Soul. Pretty innocuous 1 mana 1/1, cast for a black or a red. We're only ever casting it for red in this deck with Menace, and when it deals combat damage to a player, we may discard a card to draw a card. Going to allow us to put cards we want in the graveyard away sooner. There are 8 cards we don't mind discarding, 2 different cards, full playsets we don't mind discarding, but plenty of other cards where it's just conditionally, situationally not something we need in our hand at that moment, and Ignited Soul can kind of help us sculpt our hand towards what we need it to be. Our other 1-drop also discards cards, but is not going to necessarily be drawing us new cards to replace them, and that is Calamity Cat. 1/1 for 1 with haste. We can tap and discard a card to put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature we control and untap it, giving that creature haste until end of turn, and we can activate this only as a sorcery. Calamity Cat going to be particularly great at letting us rush in our 2-drops the following turn. We have a whole host of 2/2s that would appreciate getting a counter to swing as a 3/3 the following turn, and we even have a particularly spooky 2-drop, which we will start off with in just a moment. But Calamity Cat does a lot of great things, good with our cards we want to discard, good as we start to develop more to the board, and lets us just build up our threats to be more frightening to our opponent and harder for our opponent to deal with. That leads into Frolicking Tatsuko, the only non-2/2 creature in our 2 mana slot, functionally not a 2/2. We'll get into that. This is a 2 mana 3/2 for a red and a green. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters we put on a permanent we control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on that permanent instead. There are some things that are really nice with this card. There is one thing that is a little awkward. So for starters, Calamity Cat into Frolicking Tatsuko means we are swinging this 3-2 as a 5-4 with haste on turn 2. That puts a ton of pressure on our opponent immediately and puts them in a really sticky spot that is just going to spiral out of control as we get further into the game. We have just enough counter-generating effects between Calamity Cat, one of our other 2-drops and one of our 3-drops, plus foreign encounter to kind of keep Tatsuko relevant. But even without those other counter effects, it is a 3-2 for 2 that is just reasonable enough as we are trying to push damage to our opponent. Our opponent really can't ignore this for long or risk just dying to a 3-2 for 2 that just gets to start scaling stats really hard. That conditional 2-2 is Menelaya, Beloved Lyrist. Classic, not so much classic, but recently been a big all-star card since the March patch. Saw Menelaya get a huge buff from 4 mana to 2 mana, become just infinitely more relevant because of how much quicker she comes down and how much more powerful she looks in the face of the available tools. She's a 2 mana 1/1. When she enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on up to 2 target creatures. So oftentimes this is going to be a 2/2 that puts a counter on our Ignited Soul or our Calamity Cat. But later on, she can be a 1/1 that puts counters on 2 of our creatures, which could be really nice, especially with some immediacy is good with Frolicking Tatsuko, because that turns into 2 counters on each of 2 creatures. Tatsuko makes her a 3/3 while making Tatsuko a 5/4. Pushes a lot of damage really quickly, and we can pay 1 and remove a +1/+1 counter from another creature we control to activate Menelaya and give that creature indestructible until end of turn and tap it. Very good in the face of a lot of the board wipes running around right now. There are not a ton of board wipes available right now, and the biggest one that Menelaya doesn't protect from is my ever-beloved Chronicle of Extinction, but we build up enough counters that -2/-2 to our creatures might not even be that devastating. So Menelaya going to be pretty effective at protecting our board from a lot of removal, though there are still some removal spells that are going to kind of get around Menelaya. Our other 2-drops are a playset of Kirin of Boons. 2 mana 2/2 with Revered, shares its ability, the following ability, with other creatures we control that have counters on them, and that ability is that when this attacks, target creature defending player controls with lesser power can't block this turn. This is a really nice way to kind of just invalidate a bunch of smaller creatures, a bunch of chump blockers. Contest Coordinator is going to be running around quite a fair bit. I've seen a lot of people playing Contest Coordinators, and Kirin of Boons just doesn't care. Just completely invalidates Coordinator's ability to buy time and makes it much easier to punch through more reliably. There is another awkward point. Sorry, I never talked about the awkward point with Frolicking Tatsuko, so I suppose it's a good time to talk about some of the awkward anti-synergies in the deck. So Tatsuko, increasing the number of counters that get placed, does not see itself off a foreign encounter. So foreign encounter putting a Tatsuko in play only gives it 1 singular counter, because the Tatsuko isn't already in play to see to affect the counter granting instance. Kirin of Boons doesn't work phenomenally rather, with one of our 3-drops, which we'll get to in a moment. It's just sort of an awkward thing with this being that its attack trigger that it grants to other creatures is limited to the current power of the creature that's attacking for determining what defending creatures can't block. And one of our 3-drops is going to be generating counters on attack, and so that creates a little bit of a slight disconnect. But while it has proven to be a bit difficult in playtesting, I think that it is a small price to pay for these 2 individually very solid cards. Kirin of Boons is joined by Shiori the Trickster. 2 mana 2/2 with Flash. Whenever 1 or more counters are put on another creature we control, we can put a +1/+1 counter on Shiori. We can pay 2 to change the target of target's spell to a creature or enchantment we control with 1 or more counters on it. So this is not super important, hence why we're only on 2 of it. I have had occasions where Shiori having Flash has actually made a difference. Opponents making plays assuming that we have no further creatures in play, but that's in League where deck lists are unknown. In our actual matches, Shiori is a known quantity for our opponent to have to be aware of, so it's something they might be playing around and being mindful of. So we do have to be prepared for Shiori to be not as effective as a trick as it would be in a League match. So moving on to those 3 drops, Fabricated Anomaly is that one that's kind of awkward with Kieran of Boons, but it is just such a good card that I'm willing to overlook any awkwardness with that particular interaction. It is 2 and a red for a 2/3 enchantment creature elemental. When this creature enters, we create a puzzle box token that taps to discard a card and draw a card. As some of you may remember, if you saw my patch notes review, I realized in real time while recording that video that puzzle box token does not sacrifice, so it is repeatable. This is what I mean when I say for an encounter is not something we will have to pay the cycling cost on often between Ignited Soul and Fabricated Anomaly. If we need to just get rid of a foreign encounter, we can just discard it manalessly that way. Whenever a creature we control attacks, we can exile a number of cards from our graveyard equal to its power to put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So we don't actually have a ton of things that care about being in our graveyard. The only 2 non-land cards we have talked about are the things that care about being in the graveyard. But 8 cards in 60 that want to be in the graveyard and not get exiled to Fabricated Anomaly is a relatively low count. Which means a lot of the fodder that we pitch to Ignited Soul, pitch to Fabricated Anomaly, or that just, pitch to Calamity Cat, or that just end up in our graveyard over time from our opponents trying to keep us from killing them, we can then feed into Fabricated Anomaly to try and keep momentum high, keep our creatures threatening, and really keep the pressure on turn by turn. The fact this attacks as a 3/4 for 3 in most cases is great. Frolicking Tatsuko, of course, makes this actually a 4/5 for 3 on its first attack, which is great. Works phenomenally with Tatsuko, works pretty great with Menelea, works great with Ignited Soul and Calamity Cat and Shiori. Is a little awkward with Kieran of Boons, but of course still can make any of our creatures reverent for Kieran of Boons for future attacks. And is also very good with our final creature. And the first of 2 things we don't not only don't mind discarding, but actively would be interested in discarding, which is Spirit Realm Phoenix. This is 1 red for a 2/2 creature with flying and haste. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on this creature, it deals that much damage to each opponent. By my understanding, that does work with forward encounter. So this is a 3/3 with flying and haste that deals 1 to the opponent on enter with foreign encounter, which is very nice. And at our end step, we return it from our graveyard to our hand if 1 or more +1/+1 counters were put on a creature we controlled this turn. That does a couple really nice things. Obviously, Fabricated Anomaly, if we loot it with Puzzle Box and then put a counter on something with Fabricated Anomaly, that buys it back with Spirit Realm Phoenix. Menelea buys back Spirit Realm Phoenix. Foreign encounter buys back a dead Spirit Realm Phoenix. Calamity Cat can discard Spirit Realm Phoenix, put a counter on one of our creatures, and then get the Phoenix back at end step. Lots of nice little synergies there. But the nice thing about Phoenix is not only is it good to discard for some pseudo card advantage with Anomaly, Ignited Soul, Calamity Cat, and the counter granters, letting this be a discardable card we can just keep rebuying. Spirit Realm Phoenix is also really good in its merits as just a legitimate threat. It's a 3-mana 2/2 flyer with haste. That's going to be a decent clock on its own right, especially in conjunction with other creatures we have going. But with Menelea, Fabricated Anomaly, able to build up counters on it, with foreign encounter, able to drop it from our library and make it more threatening, this can absolutely just kill the opponent over the top. So Spirit Realm Phoenix, something we will often be discarding, but it will also absolutely be a real threat our opponent has to be aware of. And the recursive value of being able to buy it back means we can pitch it in the early game and still intend on having it available to us later on. The other card we're happy to discard is our final non-land card here, Igneous Visions. This was the big absence from my League deck list. I got 4-1 with this strategy in Revolution League, but this was card that I was not on. I was on some much more conditional, situational cards. I was on some copies of Amagaseto in the main. I was on like Clothis' Judgments, just kind of experimenting with seeing what felt right, and a lot of stuff just felt kind of clunky. Igneous Visions is the big one that was on my radar that I had missed the first time around. We can pitch it to our Calamity Cat, our Ignited Soul, our Fabricated Anomaly, and then later on in the game, single red mana, impulse draw 1 card. Very, very, very efficient. We've seen a lot of decks that want to run impulse draw running things like Faces of the Phoenix, which is 1 in a red to exile 2 cards, and we play them until we cast a spell from our hand. we can play them from exile until we cast a spell from our hand. But that flashes back for 3 and double red, which is a lot more awkward for this deck. I've had a lot of games with this strategy that don't really make it past 3 or 4 lands, even in the like deep game. And it's remarkable that this deck can grind so hard even on 3 lands. But I think, Igneous Vision's just pure mana efficiency. It is still good card advantage because it's a card we can loot away with Ignited Soul or Fabricated Anomalies Puzzle Box token, and then still turn into a relevant resource from the graveyard. So that wraps up our spell suite. We have 6 mountains, 4 forests, 4 primal fissure, 4 temple of origins, and 4 urban jungle. I messed around a little bit with trying to play some copies of the paths, the cycling lands that enter untapped if they're your first or second land of the game. I've messed around a little bit with trying to run some of the errors in the weft fetches, but I think ultimately just having as many lands that are untapped early as possible is good. All of these lands are untapped turns 1 through 3, and then starting turn 4, Temple of Origins and Primal Fissure are tapped, but we can just start looting those away. Everything in our deck being castable before turn 4 means that we never are really held back by Primal Fissure or Temple of Origins entering tapped beyond that third turn. So moving on to the sideboard here, we have 15 cards here. We have Archival Storage, which does hurt us a little bit, but hurts a lot of our opponents more, I think. This is a 1-mana artifact. Cards in graveyards lose all abilities. We can pay 1 and activate it to put a card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library at sorcery speed, or you can pay 2 and cycle it. I like Archival Storage a lot right now. Some of the decks I'm most afraid of are things like the Stratostorm combo, where you put the 4-mana 4/4 into play off of Shigane Manor Burns on turn 3 after pitching an Arbiter to Shigane Manor Burns on that turn, so then you get to untap your lands, play more things, or you get to reshuffle your hand and draw 5, and then shut your opponent back down to 2 cards in hand. Archival Storage shuts off Stratostorm because it can't copy abilities in graveyard if there are no abilities in the graveyard. Archival Storage shuts off a lot of mean, slower things. I have not seen a whole lot of people playing Wade Through Spores, surprisingly, but it does shut off Wade Through Spores and other flashback effects, so notably it does hurt our own Igneous Visions. But I think Archival Storage there's enough like grindy mid-range decks that care about things in their graveyards in a degree that Archival Storage punishes. So I kind of do like that in its respect. And of course we can cycle it when we draw extra copies, though that is also just true of our usual engine being able to cycle it for no mana. Otherwise, we have 6 anti-artifact and enchantment cards and 6 burn spells. Anti-artifact and enchantment things are Masksmith and Hungry Blob. We have a 4-2 split here. Masksmith is a new card, 2-mana 3/2, Elf Shaman. You can pay a green and sacrifice it to exile an artifact, enchantment, or card from a graveyard. This is very nice if there is a specific hallmark card in our opponent's deck that we have to be wary of, or this can also double up with Archival Storage as Graveyard Hate in a pinch. But I specifically like Masksmith because 2-mana 3/2, it is just enough of a reasonable body that we can develop it early and not feel like our sideboard card is hindering our ability to apply pressure to the opponent. It's part of why I wanted Archival Storage as a 1-cost effect. Specifically, I wasn't going to be on Faces of the Faceless because I didn't want a 2-cost tech option, so it was really Archival Storage or Soul Guide Lantern, and maybe Lantern would be better because it's Graveyard Hate that it can put itself in the graveyard for Anomaly, but I think I just like Archival Storage more in a vacuum here. So Masksmith as our pinpoint Graveyard Hate, but also getting to pick off artifacts and enchantments. And in a pinch, we can crack this and rebuy something from our graveyard by cashing it. So we can cash a foreign encounter. We can cash a Menelea, a Fabricated Anomaly, a Spirit Realm Phoenix, if we're just struggling to get stuff out of our graveyard and get things rolling that way. And then 2 copies of Hungry Blob just feels like one of the big necessities right now. Cleans up Shigane Manor Burns and the treasure token it creates. Cleans up a bunch of sagas and tokens, cleans up any Banishing Light effect or anything. So I really like Hungry Blob. Looks a bit better off a foreign encounter, though it is a bit low impact otherwise in our much more aggressive strategy. And then finally, Bleeding Out and Terminal Impact are here. This is primarily for our more aggressive matchups, but of course there is also some consideration for Terminal Impact being uncounterable, helping out a little bit against blue tempo decks. So we have Bleeding Out, which is double red as an instant, deals 3 damage to any target. Excess damage dealt to a creature or planeswalker this way is dealt to its controller instead. This lets us pick off a 2/2 or a 2/1 and then push some damage to the opponent's face, or we can shoot down a planeswalker after it's been down ticked to take that off the board and then push some damage to the opponent that way. The Dutiful Wanderer is one of the harder planeswalkers for this deck to fight through because that new passive limiting you to attacking with total power 4 or less on the other side of the table from it makes it very hard for you to attack with some of the creatures in this deck because of how much this deck skews into pushing that power above 4 in a lot of cases. And Bleeding Out can help us clean up a Dutiful Wanderer on the other side of the board in a lot of cases. And also just it's 2 mana, push 3 damage to the opponent's face in a pinch, which is very, very relevant, I have found, in a lot of grindier matchups as well. And Terminal Impact, good in grindy matchups, good in tempo matchups. 1 mana for 1 damage, 6 mana for 6 damage. There are absolutely situations I have found where we do just start building up additional land drops. We stop looting things away to puzzle box tokens, and we just kind of bide our time and build up to a big Terminal Impact. This being uncounterable means that it is just a ticking clock for slower control decks, counterspell decks, where they do have to be wary that Terminal Impact can just end the game if they can't get us off the table before then. But Terminal Impact and Bleeding Out, even if we never board them in, they're just nice inevitability to scare our opponent into having to be wary of them. So that is it for Red-Green Looter Stompy. I'm very excited to play this deck in the GP. I have a lot of high hopes for it. I really wanted to try playing a slower, grindier strategy, but ultimately I think the Red-Green Stompy shell just is one of the cleanest decks I've brewed up. And I want to make sure we can try and have some good results. And I mean, hey, I got 3 league promos already with this deck. I promoed Calamity Cat, promoed Shiori, and I promoed Spirit Realm Phoenix. So, I mean, hey, if this deck doesn't get hit by patches going into June, maybe we'll keep rocking this deck next month and get to show off some of the bling. So, wish me luck in round 1, and wish me luck throughout the entirety of the GP, and I will see you in that round 1. Take care, everybody.